Please watch the video until the end to feel every moment of their story. Chapter 1: The Day the Clock Started. He who tells this tale is a man who watched it all, and remembers the small things as if they were carved into the city sidewalks. On an ordinary Tuesday in late spring, the world seemed to tilt for two people who had been orbiting separate solitudes for years. Elias, who carried a satchel of half-started novels and songs he never played in public, met Mara beneath a scaffolding of scaffolds and pigeons, in an alley that smelled of coffee and rain. She was laughing at a street musician, an unguarded sound that folded into the morning like sunlight through blinds. Their meeting was not cinematic in the way strangers collide in scripts. It was a mismatch of movements. A paper bag snagged on his braid of keys, a spill of roasted beans, hands reaching at the same time. The world obligingly stopped being indifferent. They exchanged names, Elias, Mara, and a joke about the stubbornness of spilled coffee. From the first conversation came a kind of ease, as if two people found a private phrase and decided to use it for a while. I had watched countless couples begin. What made this one different was a quiet intensity. They spoke of trivial things, baristas who remembered orders, the small habits that were the scaffolding of daily life, but behind each triviality was an urgent tenderness, like someone whispering the last lines of a letter they meant to keep. Chapter 2: The Geometry of Us. Their relationship unfurled with a cartographer's precision. They mapped each other slowly. The way Mara closed her eyes when she read, the exact pitch of Elias's laugh, the scar on her wrist for which she had no long story, the unfinished chorus in his notebook. Weekends became islands they dared to spend together. Flea markets, midnight cinema, the quiet theft of a midday nap in each other's arms. Time for them felt elastic. A single afternoon of wandering could contain a lifetime's worth of discovery. They made ordinary rituals sacred, cooking together until the kitchen was a constellation of pans, stealing post-it notes with declarations, leaving voicemails full of nonsense. To an observer, the love was spectacular for its ordinariness. It was a bond formed out of constancy rather than spectacle. But nothing stays contained forever. There were hints, small asides, about appointments and tests that Mara would rather not speak of. Elias noticed the way she would study a calendar as if it were a foreign language, and the way she sometimes paused in the middle of sentences, distracted by something inside her she refused to name. He feared asking, but the knowing in his chest was louder than his fear. People who love each other carry each other's questions like stones, heavy and warm. Chapter 3: The Name of the Clock. When Mara finally told him the truth, she did so with the same soft candor with which she asked for his hand in line at the bakery. There was a phrase that made both of them smaller and larger at once. A prognosis, a limit measured in months. The clock was not literal. There were no ticking gears audible in the night, but there was, instead, an indifferent calendar that told them their time together might be briefer than they had imagined. This revelation could have been ruinous. It could have turned them inward, selfishly sheltering against the inevitable. Instead, they reacted with a kind of furious generosity. Where others might have hoarded hope or retreated, they decided to spend. They chose to live as if every loose second were a coin to be spent on meaning. The narrator, who is a man who kept watching, thought of how many small deaths we face before the big ones. The death of plans, of illusions, of the private future one imagines with another. Elias and Mara refused to mourn the future they had not yet owned. They redecorated their days with intention. Letters were written and read. Confessions kept for rainy nights were spoken aloud. They made promises that were not about longevity but about presence. "I will listen when you are afraid," Elias said, and meant it like a vow. Chapter 4: Reckonings. There were confrontations with ordinary cruelties. Friends suggested strategies that sounded more like bargaining than living. Some offered platitudes that fell like cold rain on a rooftop. The system of medicine proposed timetables and protocols. The world insisted on bureaucracy while the heart wanted a compass. Elias found himself caught between fury and tenderness. Furious at the unfairness of the numbers, tender toward Mara as if she were glass that needed only the gentlest hands. At nights they argued like people who love the truth more than they love comfort. They argued about whether to move to a town by the sea, about whether to tell the colleagues, about whether to keep planning or to abandon planning altogether. Those arguments were not tearing them apart. They were, in their way, a kind of crucible. Decisions made under pressure contain a clarity that comforts later. They prioritized honesty and small rebellions. Impulsive train trips, a night driving to see the northern lights, a pact to learn 2 lessons. How to live with beauty and how to open their hands when it was time to let go. I saw Elias learn to be present in ways he had never known. More like a patient who had been taught to notice the shifting colors of the sky than like a man who had been given a second chance. He painted a mural on the wall of their apartment, a riot of colors and fragments of the words that kept them safe. Mara kissed paint from the corner of his mouth. They stamped the days into memory like a traveler engraving milestones onto a map. Chapter 5: The Weather of Goodbye. I will not pretend that their story avoided grief. There were seasons of heavy weather, hospital rooms, sterile faces, a landscape of waiting chairs. Yet even in that, there was tenderness that made small miracles appear. A hand that always found the other. A song hummed into the night like a bridge. The part that haunts me is not the end itself but the way they threaded meaning into every final morning. Mara taught Elias how to tether memory to sensation. She told him to remember smells rather than dates, to hold onto the weight of her shoulder, the cadence of her laugh. He learned to measure their life not in years but in chapters and moments, and in that measurement they had abundance. When the final day came, and it did as all days do, there was sorrow, of course, a sorrow enormous enough to reshape a man's bones. But there was also a great illumination. Elias sat by the window, holding a paper crane she had folded weeks earlier. He watched light move across the floor and thought of how many small, radiant things had been placed into his life by her presence. He felt gratitude like a hand on his chest, steady and warm. Chapter 6: After. What remains after such a love is hard to describe without risking cliché. Time, I learned watching them, is not simply a thief. It is also a teacher. Elias lived on, wounded, of course, like anyone who has loved and lost, but he carried those days as a ledger of riches. He wrote with a new clarity, his sentences trimmed of now useless ornaments. People ask him why his stories feel like they contain whole worlds in a single page. The answer is that he learned to harvest everything worth keeping and leave the rest to the wind. Sometimes, on a day that smells like coffee and rain, he walks past the alley where they met and hears laughter in the echo of the city. He thinks of Mara folding stars out of paper, and he smiles in a way that is both ache and benediction. He passes on the small lessons she taught him. The absurd joy of spontaneous trips, the sanctity of ordinary rituals, the courage to sit with someone in their most human hours. He tells this tale not to immortalize pain but to catalog the way love can expand the smallness of time into something vast. The story is not about avoiding death. It is about learning how to live within its shadow so that the light takes on new dimensions. There are no tidy morals here, only a truth I have seen. That when 2 people decide to be present, even brief time can feel like a generous expanse. Please subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, give the video a like, comment your thoughts, and share this video with someone who needs to hear a story about love lived fully.